Loud and clear.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Magandang hapon. Salamat. Magandang hapon sa lahat po ng nanonood ngayon. Atin lamang ho ay dalawa pa lang yung nakapagtanong and we arrive at a conclusion and it was stated by the COA that there was no overpricing or there was no findings of overpricing with regard to the purchase of face masks and PPE by the DBMPS for the Department of Health. So,
Sir, I suggest you turn off your video because you are staggered and you are not having a good signal there. Can you turn off the video to improve the audio?
Should I turn off the video?
Please turn off the video because you cannot be understood here.
Okay na po ba?
Okay na. Ang ganda ng boses na, boss.
Well, salamat po, Mr. Chair. Kahit hindi nyo ako nakikita, at least naririnig nyo akong malinaw. So, kanina ho, the conclusion that we arrive as early as 2 interpellators elicited their question is COA maintained that there was no overpricing. The second issue that we want to arrive is whether the legal aspect of the procurement has been observed. And at the outset, Mr. Chair, ito'y pinatunayan ng Director at ngayon ay Deputy Ombudsman na yung kanilang procurement, mode of procurement na ginamit ay yung negotiated procurement under the emergency purchase provided by Republic Act 9184. But in order to further aid the pandemic response and allow the President and the executive branch to immediately procure the needed medical supplies and equipments, sinuportahan pa ito ng provisions ng Bayanihan 1 at Bayanihan 2. But be it noted, Mr. Chair, Director Warren, that the laws still require the most advantageous price to the government should the negotiated procurement be observed. One is the existing price data of the agency, the Department of Trade and Industry or other relevant agencies. And there must be a preliminary market scanning done by the agency showing prevailing market prices and practice. Ang tanong ko po, Director Warren, whether this was all observed by the DBM PS, considering that you have initiated the mode of procurement based on a negotiated purchase or emergency purchase under 9184.
Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, under negotiated procurement in emergency cases under RA 9184, a market price analysis is actually not required under the rules. You are actually allowed to directly negotiate, evaluate, and then award the contract. Bayanihan 1 exempts us even from RA 9184. But to answer your question, we went over and above the requirement of the law and did market canvassing. So even if we're not required, before we went into direct negotiation, we undertook market price analysis po using historical data or actual prices from available suppliers.
So, Director Warren, so how many submitted the price quotation? Can you submit to this or at least enumerate to this committee the list of the proponents during that time?
We require at least 3 prices, Your Honor. Gaya ng in-explain kanina, pwede po ito historical data within 6 months or actual prices ng available suppliers po. And then we also consider the price freeze of DTI or DOH if there is a price freeze.
And what was the result of the market scan?
Always, Your Honor, we procure the lowest available price. taking into consideration if it if it complies rather with the technical specification and our delivery schedule.
Well, tama ho ba sabihin na yung sinabi nyo kanina, based on the technical specification of the Department of Health, lumabas ho na yung sa market scan resulted in a price range of 1,800 plus to 2,800 for the full PPE. Tama po ba?
Iba-iba po yon, pero that is correct. Yun yung sa presentation yung kinukot po ninyo, Your Honor.
And was the winning supplier the lowest and most compliant with the technical specification?
Yes, Your Honor. We do not... Opo.
Yes, you may proceed. Please proceed.
We do not... What happens is we are... you're talking about PPE sets po.
Yes, so the PPE sets.
Opo. We are given an agency procurement request by DOH for that item. It contains the quantity and the unit cost. So in that case, that's 2,000 pesos per set. So we never go beyond the budget of DOH since yun lang po yung budget nila. And then ang second layer po natin yan in ensuring that we get the most advantageous contract is we do market price analysis. Yun po yung na-explain before we go to direct negotiation po.
So madaling sabi nito, Director Warren, even if we procure or use the mode of procurement on the emergency purchase provided by Republic Act 9184, you still observe that win requirement to determine the winning supplier. Like what I've said is, lowest price ba yung nanalo? At ito ba'y most compliant with the DOH technical specification?
We used Bayanihan 1 po, that negotiated procurement under emergency cases for the PPE sets because Bayanihan 1 was effected already in March 26, 2020. And to answer your question, yes, we always chose the lowest complying and it should be responsive to the technical specifications of the end user. Kasi hindi naman po pwede na mababa presyo niya pero hindi yun ang pinapabili ni DOH. So hindi rin po pwede yun. It has to be responsive to the technical specifications po, Mr. Chairman.
So, sino ho pula yung lowest price of the on the winning supplier at ito ba'y rationable na presyo compared to the previous purchases of the Department of Health?
Iba-iba po yung nanalo po. Marami na po tayong na-awardan ng PPE sets pero sa simula ang pinagbilihan po natin is direct from China. So sila po yung merong supply. So wala po tayong mahanap na 8-piece set dito sa Pilipinas at that time at the quantity that was needed by DOH. So with the help of the IATF, we procured directly from China.
Mrs. Chair, let me course my question to the Department of Health, Secretary Duque. Secretary Duque, the lowest price of the winning supplier was 1,900 for the PPE. Do you think that was a reasonable price, Secretary Duque?
Yes, Your Honor.
And considering that in 2015, the Department of Health bought through a public bidding a PPE sets for 8 pieces for 3,500 pesos. Now, the PPE full set consisting of 9 pieces procured in 2020 was only for 1,910 pesos. Was that correct, Secretary Duque?
Thereabouts, correct, Mr. Chairman.
So, paano ho makukumpara? In 2015, was that an extraordinary circumstance?
No, Mr. Chairman. It was a rather normal situation. No pandemic, I believe, at that time.
And sa ngayon, when you speak about April of 2020. How do you consider it? Because that was at the height of the pandemic, at the height of the lockdown and travel restrictions. What was it?
I would reiterate, Mr. Chairman, that the price was very reasonable and went through the process of complying with the most reasonable pricing structure.
Now, how about the procurement from Pharmaly? Was the price of the face mask procured from Pharmaly reasonable to you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And this is also on the basis of the market scanning. I believe that was done by the PSDBM.
Because some base it, Secretary Duque, on the EMS price tag at 13.50 for the face mask. Pero, establisado natin ngayon sa hearing na ito, tinanong kanina yung CEO o presidente ng EMS that hindi nila kaya o they have na wala silang stock noong April of 2020. Tanong ko, Secretary Duque, sa 13.50 face mask, deliverable at the month of June. Sabihin na natin, pinili natin yung murang face mask at 13.50. Wala tayong face mask from April to May. Dumating June dahil pinili natin yung murang mask na 13.50. Sa tingin mo, at the span of 2 months na wala tayong face mask, ano kaya mangyayari sa ating mga health workers at sa ating sambayanan?
Mr. Chairman, if we allowed that to happen, if we had waited until the delivery by EMS in June, we would have lost a lot of lives. We would have had a collapsed healthcare system. Because can you imagine the overwhelming transmission that is going on in the healthcare facilities? And our healthcare workers are the most vulnerable. I would have envisaged, siguro, parang nakita ko na kung hindi tayo kaagad bumili, ay malamang maraming nagkasakit, nagkahawaan, na-isolate, na-quarantine, na-hospital, na-intubate. At pinakamabigat po sa lahat, pwedeng marami pang namatay. Kanya talagang hindi naman pwede na pababayaan natin, mag-aantay tayo. Hindi po pwedeng dahilan po yun, Mr. Chairman. So we have to get, as soon as possible, as the law says, to procure as expeditiously as we can, which is explicit in the Bayanihan 1 law and also in other pertinent laws. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I fully agree with you, Secretary Duque, because I'm trying to imagine on a face mask of which our co-equal house in the Senate pinipilit nila na may mas murang face mask. But the facts that was established here is that, Mr. Chair, that was only available on the month of June of 2020. The fact remains that on April of 2020, the face mask global value chain, talagang ang hirap-hirap. That was the height of the pandemic. In fact, Mr. Chair, let me read to you one of the articles or the report of the OECD policy responses to coronavirus dated May 4, 2020. According to Nielsen Retail, the price of face masks increased by 319% in the United States between end of January and end of February 2020. Before the crisis, a box of 100 masks could be bought for less than $4 in the United States. However, at the end of February, there were reports that single masks were being sold for $20 a piece. The same phenomenon has been observed with respirators, with the price of a box of 20 increasing from $17 to $70. Several countries are now implementing measures to curb prices to protect consumers. This is from OECD policy responses to coronavirus, the face of global value chain or the face mask global value chain. Now, to continue, Mr. Chair, is it normal for a prices of supplies such as face masks, which I have already stated, Mr. Chair, test kits and other medical supplies and equipment to fluctuate and change over time? That's normal, Mr. Chair. In fact, that was established not only here in the Philippines, but global. Now, Secretary Duque, do you confirm again that the 3,500 pesos and the 3,800 pesos per set, respectively in 2015 and 2016, was purchased by your department, by the Department of Health for PPE?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. And just for the record, I wasn't the Secretary of Health then, but based on the documents, indeed, this was purchased through a public bidding mode of procurement. And however, the COA report on this particular observation did not make mention of any overprice.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, the procurement was not under emergency or a negotiated procurement, or they were procured through a public bidding, Mr. Chair. And Secretary, did the government crowd out local companies and manufacturers of face masks and other suppliers in favor of foreign suppliers like those from China for the purchase of needed supplies during the height of the COVID-19 in early 2020?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Can you please elaborate, Mr. Chair? Secretary Duque?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In fact, the DTI, the DOH, PSDBM had really wanted that we support the local manufacturing companies. And it is for this reason that EMS was awarded the contract in sometime in April. However, they could not deliver in April. The deliveries, as had been mentioned earlier, could only be realized by June 1st, if my recollection serves me right. And given that time differential, it is without basis to make a comparison of an available mask in April when the need was so acute, and you compared a 1350 mask of EMS that was going to be available at a much later time. And clearly, there is no basis to compare. And that is why the price differential has been observed, Mr. Chairman.
So in other words, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Duque, the local industries could not deliver the needed volume in the beginning of the pandemic. And thus, the government was left with no choice but to open the procurement for the foreign suppliers. Am I correct?
You are exactly correct, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, since my time is limited, I would like to reserve for another round. But let me just, manifest something, Mr. Chair, before I end. There lies a confusion, Mr. Chair. The confusion stems from the issuance of the GPPB of its IRR, heavily adopting Republic Act 9184 terminologies and documentations and processes for Bayanihan 1 and the COA insistence on enforcing the IRR. Now, what does the law says, Mr. Chair? Section 4, paragraph K of the Bayanihan law authorizes the President to undertake the procurement as the need arises in the most expeditious manner as exemptions from the provisions of Republic Act 9184 or the Government Procurement Reform Act and other relevant laws. should there be doubt, then this exemption governs the procurement of COVID-19 items. Now, none. In Section 7 of Bayanihan 1, Mr. Chair, on the construction or interpretation provides, in case the exercise of the powers herein granted conflicts with other statutes, orders, or rules, or regulations, the provisions of the Act shall prevail. What about the GPPB IRR? First, the GPPB is actually a creation of the Public Act 9184, Mr. Chair. Section 63, Article 20 of RA 91 provides for the organization and functions. Second, Mr. Chair, Section 75 of 9184 expressly directed the GPPB within 60 days to promulgate of the Act to promulgate the rules and regulations of 9184. Now, within 30 days upon approval of the IRR, the standard forms of procurement should be promulgated and approved. Mr. Chair, no similar provisions are found in Bayanihan 1. Neither were these discussed in the Senate deliberations. The Bayanihan 1 is therefore self-executing. It does not need an IRR. So the question that begs to be answered is, can the spring rise above its source? In other words, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair, the GPPB, through the issuance of an IRR, amend or restrict the exemption given by the law. Mali po yun. Mali po yun. So because the ordinary circumstances, the legislative department through Bayanihan saw the wisdom to authorize the President to buy like how private individuals do unrestricted by tedious processes and cumbersome documentations of the Public Act 9184. So basically, Mr. Chair, Bayanihan 1 allows the President to simply look for a supplier, pay, and get the receipt. This is what we're trying to establish. First, we were able to establish there was no overpricing. Second, we need to come up a laudable conclusion that the purchase was in accordance with the law. And I am convinced, Mr. Chair, that the purchase, the procurement of PPEs and the face mask was in accordance with the law. Salamat, Mr. Chair.